Thanks again, Sam. I'd like everybody to take a deep breath and relax because this is a chat and not a lecture. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be. My name is Mark Walmsley, and I'd like to thank Siham for organising such a great event and for giving me the chance to talk to you guys, meet some other fantastic presenters. It's so friendly and engaging yesterday. As I'm not a PowerPoint guru, I'm afraid, or its greatest fan, so please don't expect too many slides. I know that many people are just listening, so I'd rather you felt that this was like a conversation rather than a lecture. For that reason, Siham is my co-pilot, so feel free to jump in, and indeed any of my other co-presenters from yesterday or today, if you want to join in, the more the merrier. Please ask Will to add you. Just to pick up on yesterday, I joined all the talks yesterday and learned something new, inspiring and meaningful in every one of them. And I detected some themes emerging, which was really nice as well. And those were trust, change, innovative thinking, well-being, both physical and mental, and humour. Drew's talk yesterday was hilarious. It was like watching a stand-up comedian doing a keynote speech. It was brilliant. And from those themes, we're starting to explore what that means for leaders in business and indeed their followers. So Siham has asked me to talk today about self-promotion and networking. Now, I have a feeling that the reason she's done that is because she's had enough of me banging on about it for 20 years, and it's now your turn. So here we go. And I apologise if I go off piste. I love it when these conversations wander. So I'm sure Siham will tell me about anything that's happening in the chat that we might want to respond to. With that in mind, I'd like to kick off with a question that you can answer in the chat box, if that's okay. I'd like you to imagine that you're allowed to have an hour with anybody, living or dead, just for a chat, to meet them and have a chat. So would you kindly just pop the name of that person into the chat box, please? And we'll come back and have a look at those later. So, as mentioned in the summary for this talk, not everybody is comfortable with the concept of blowing your own trumpet or networking in environments where there are people you haven't met. So my task today, having done that quite a lot, is to help you with some advice to make it much more fun, easier, and more effective. And that's whether you're trying to make new connections simply you're in an academic environment, whether you're looking for new business opportunities. It even relates to dating events. So I'll probably pull out a few facts and figures. I'd like to talk to you about the concept of referral marketing, which is kind of where self-promotion and networking live. Give you a few strategic pointers and a few little tactics and perhaps some tips and tricks when you're in those environments where you have the opportunity to meet and get to know other people. Once I've done those bits, Siham and I will open up a Q&A, which I hope will be interactive and informative and a stimulating exchange of views, and more than happy if any of my fellow presenters want to jump in at any point. And questions in the Q&A, please, rather than the chat, if you have any. And by all means, track me down if you'd like to do any kind of follow-up. So just a little bit more about me for the context. Yes, I'm all of the things that Siham has mentioned. Very proud to be the co-founder of Chuffed, CHUFD. We're a global creative social enterprise helping emerging talent in its journey from learning to earning. And the happy consequence of that is that we can do some really great creative branding, design and marketing work for amounts that are significantly less than traditional agencies. We're also a bit pirate, more of which later if you wish. But the reason I'm doing this spot is because I am an over enthusiastic networker. It all started for me, I think, on LinkedIn back in 2004. I think this was a complete accident because this was referred to me, of course, but I think I was one of the first 100,000 users of LinkedIn, and at the time that was the platform for me because I was in a B2B environment. That puts me in a small group of those early adopters, but as I said, it was a complete accident, and I genuinely wish I'd taken the same approach to retirement planning and my pensions, because there is a parallel there. The earlier you start, however little, the easier it becomes later on. So I'm very lucky now to have quite a good following on LinkedIn, and it's become the single most important resource for my business development and marketing process. But I have to fess up at this stage, excuse me. I am entirely self-taught in the things that I now do professionally. I am utterly unqualified to do any of the things that I do. But I'd like you to stop for a moment and just think about what I just did. Effectively, I conceded a shortcoming, and imagine we've just met. I've conceded a shortcoming. Now, what my experience in self-promotion and networking is that if you do that, you immediately put people at ease. They've won the competition already. I found this to be true in pitching environments as well. I was pitching in London for a big global organization contract. They were in New York. We realized we didn't have an office in New York. We thought they might be worried about that. And I said to my fellow panel members, I said, look, we've got to head this off at the pass because they'll be worrying about this and they won't be listening to what we say. So we took the decision to concede that shortcoming right at the start of our presentation. We even got one of our US-based clients to record a little video to explain that it wasn't a problem, that we didn't have a New York office, and that they were investing heavily so that we could afford to do so. That had a rather magical effect. It stopped them worrying. They all sat back and went, okay. And then, of course, they listened and believed what we said. So I'm hoping, having done that, that you're now warming. Our warming, I can't see you, sadly. I'm hoping you can see me properly. But that it's creating an environment in which we can start to get to know each other and hopefully like each other a little bit quicker. So tip there, concede a shortcoming. I'd like, if I may, excuse me, just to talk a little bit about the concept of referral marketing. Now, I'm aware that our audience will not be fully, entirely people who are comfortable with marketing. But referral marketing is really our term now for the good old word of mouth. It's becoming increasingly important in professional relationships, business development, job searching, in interviews, and indeed personal relationships. So, but the key to this is that the underlying important element is trust, one of the things that was developed yesterday. And people want to know what makes you tick. The great thing about having a circle of contacts who are close to you, get you, like you, and understand what it is that you do and why perhaps you're different and a bit better and perhaps even remarkable, is that you then have effectively your own part-time sales team wrapped around you without a cost. And that's achieved through a process of, in referral marketing groups in particular, of structure and frequency, so that we have the opportunity to meet people on a frequent and regular basis. That allows relationships to develop, and it's a good idea to give before you take. That's when trust starts to develop, and that's where referrals start being passed in those environments, and if you're in it for business development, then revenue follows. So there are a number of referral marketing groups. Some of you, I'm sure, will have attended them. So it's worth reviewing that, and it's that trust that really drives that. I did a bit of research to just get some stats, just one I picked out that I thought you might be interested in. According to Forrester, 80% of all business-to-business and business-to-consumer transactions involve some form of word-of-mouth recommendation. That staggered me. But actually, if you think about it, when you look at the number of recommendations being asked for on Facebook and the number of people being tagged in comments on LinkedIn posts, I can quite see that. But that's Forrester's view. I've in the lecturing I've done in the groups that I belong to, I've often done straw polls, and a significant number of people report that actually without word of mouth and inbound referrals, we'd struggle. So it remains a really important channel. Excuse me. I had lunch a few months ago with one of the senior leaders at Lloyds Bank in the UK here, and I was curious to understand how it was possible that they had 200,000 followers on their LinkedIn company page, 60,000 employees, but the posts that they were posting and publishing on their LinkedIn company page were being liked perhaps 25 times and shared even less. I found that really quite strange, why that would be the case, which there is a parallel and emerging discipline, if you like, alongside referral marketing as part of the marketing niche called employee advocacy. And that's something that I've been doing some work on recently. How can you engage and encourage the people who are in that close circle, which would include employees, to help spread the word about what it is that you're offering? That's a slight aside, but that's worth investigating as well. The other thing that the research I did showed was that referred business opportunities, and I guess this would still be the case in personal engagement, they tend to be easier to convert. So if we think of ourselves in a business environment, those opportunities tend to convert more easily. They tend to have a higher lifetime value if the initial introduction through networking and self-promotion was through a referral, a trusted referral. They tend to produce higher retention rates, and I found that price sensitivity drops in the context of a trusted referral. So I imagine we can all think of some scenarios in which we've knowingly paid over the odds, but we're happy to do so because we knew that there was a trusted referral. And if a friend recommends a garden designer to you, the friend is putting their reputation on the line as well. So they do tend to be safer options, but you might end up paying a little bit more. And this whole area of networking and self-promotion, both on and offline, is clearly increasingly important in these strange times. Zoom is not the only company to have done it particularly well in the last quarter. LinkedIn's revenues rose 24% on last year in the second quarter of this year. So it's clear that these relationships are important. The interest might dry up a little bit. The contracts might not be quite so numerous. Some of the retained relationships might drop away temporarily, but the relationships remain, they endure. And so I think that's probably why we're starting to focus on building those. I'm going to pause for a moment and ask Siham, have we had any dinner party guests arrive?
Yeah, we have. I'll tell you who we've got. As our guests today, we've got Richard Branson, Bill Clinton, Richard Feynman, David Hockney, Obama, Anita Roddick, Bob Dylan, someone's grandfather, Jesus, Ricky Gervais, Einstein, and Steve Jobs. Oh, Sylvester Stallone and Jackie Turpin, Michelle Mone. Who else have we got? I think that's, someone said, oh yeah, I think you have a double. Is that right, Mark?
Namesake or face sake?
Namesake.
Namesake, yes, I do have a double. I think he's probably listening.
Yes, he is. He's the one
That's
that's.
a nice. Shall I go off piece? Can I go off piece and tell the story of that? Yes, this relates loosely to networking, but a few months ago I decided to go onto LinkedIn and track down all of the other Mark Walmsleys on LinkedIn. That was inspired by a TV show by a guy called Dave Gorman, who I think traveled the world looking for other Dave Gormans. I connected with Mark Walmsley, who lives in the Midlands, the other Mark Walmsley, we both call each other. We're now doing business together, which is great. Finding the emails is a nightmare, as you can imagine, because every time I search for him, I find myself in my inbox. But that's just an example of being a little bit creative around it. We've had a lot of interest from people who want to write the story when we about it, because it's just great fun. And I think Mark's with us. I think that was probably his question. Hello, Mark. Good morning. There's a screen. So
we've also got Michael Schumacher, Amelia Earhart, Dave Gorman, and yeah, I think that's all our guests.
I hope that it was the same person who invited Jesus and Ricky Gervais. That's all I can say, because that would be a vibrant conversation. It's interesting that somebody mentioned Jesus, though, because I wasn't going to bring this up for fear of going down a rabbit hole, but actually, what would Jesus do? Is something that I sometimes ask, in those situations. A character like that would probably behave slightly differently from most at a networking event. And as we put on the trail for this talk, the way to become the most important person in the room is to make everybody else feel as though they are. And I'll come on to some tips about how to do that. But I can quite imagine how Jesus would network in those circumstances. But that's a lovely dinner party list. I'll come on to the reason why I wanted to do that in a moment. But I have a few little kind of strategic themes around the concept of self-promotion and networking. And the first is feel. I've seen some studies, and I'm sure many of you will have done, that suggest that people are much more likely to remember how you made them feel than either what you said or what you wrote. So I keep that at heart when I'm in these situations, trying to make sure that I'm allowing the spotlight to fall on the person that you're speaking to in conversations. There is a lovely poem that you might like to dig out called The Invitation, and it's by Araya Mountain Dreamer, great name. And as you'd expect, it's a little bit hippie and a little bit left field, but it opens with the following sentence. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. Now, that's a bit in your face and a bit heavy, but actually there's an awful lot of valuable insight tied up in that. It's a great poem. It goes on with 20 verses, I think. But it just highlights the fact that when two humans meet, especially if they've never met before, it's the human element of our interactions and our conversations that start to build the trust. And that helps people to understand what makes you tick. So whenever possible, think about how you're making people feel in those environments, especially leaders. Because you won't be expected to do that. And so if you're higher up the food chain, it's even more impactful if you can do that. The second theme is to give. excuse me. I belong to a referral marketing group, and we have our philosophy is that givers gain. In referral marketing and effective networking and effective self-promotion, in order for there to be a tangible output from that engagement, whether that's a date, a follow-up business meeting, a job, somebody's got to give in order for somebody to gain. And if you're one of the givers, it works so much better, especially for leaders, as I mentioned. And which means pacing and being rather clever with how you interact with somebody, especially if you're feeling your way in an initial conversation with people, with somebody you don't know. Excuse me. I think I posted on one of the slides here. I should probably move to the next one, actually. I do apologise. Just something for you to enjoy while I'm talking. Nice to meet you. Will you marry me? It doesn't work, obviously, and countless people in networking environments adopt that approach. So it's worth not being quite so questioning, if you like, in terms of, or not trying to assert what it is that you do, and ask those questions at the wrong time. It's a bit like turning up at a dinner party and shouting your name and what you do for a living while everyone else is still talking. So the reason I asked about the dinner party guests was because I wanted to touch on the next theme, which is to listen and show interest, importantly. Now, I'm sure we've all been in environments where we really not enjoying the company of the person we're speaking to. It may be that when we remember when we were children, we would avoid that trip to go and see the great maiden aunt. But listening and showing interest is extremely attractive. So if you're there with one of your dinner party guests and you've got an hour, are you likely to be talking or listening? Certainly, if I was with Ricky Gervais, I'd be listening. And there's an old adage, of course, that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should really use them in that proportion. The other sales comment is that nobody ever put the phone down when they were speaking. And I try and use that as well. Allowing people to share what they want to with you as a receptive and interested listener is an extremely attractive quality in somebody if you're showing interest. It also has the added benefit of putting the person who's speaking to you slightly in your debt, because you're listening to what it is that they're saying. So we've done the dinner party guest. The other character who I keep in mind in these circumstances, and some people may know this and some may not, but I do apologise if it's a bit obscure, is Captain Carrot in The Guards from Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. The reason I mention that is that he's actually a king but doesn't know it, but behaves so much like one. So if you wanted to do a little wiki search on Captain Carrot, you'd learn. I did. It was brilliant, and the books are fantastic. The other thing I try and do, and I would advise if in these circumstances, especially if you've just met somebody for the first time, is I try not to say what it is I do for a living. Obviously, you needed some context for this conversation, but so it's a little bit different. But I wait for that person to ask. Now, a couple of magical things happen in those circumstances as well. It's a sign that you've done the job right and you've listened and you've shown interest, because if somebody then says, "Oh, Mark, what it is that you do for a living," you know you've ticked that box of getting it in the right order. You've given, and now you're gaining, and they will have warmed to you. And again, they're slightly in your conversational debt, if you like, in that respect. Just another one on this section, and Siham, please do tell me if I'm going on too long.
Yeah,
because
I was about to, I'm just trying to get my video up so I can interrupt you, but because we do want we do want time for, there's lots of comments here, and,
Great.
we've got some questions, and I selfishly have some questions too.
Okay, well, I'm going to buzz through these then. You might
Okay.
want to, yeah, so bullet points for the rest. Be creative. Don't be an accountant, be a forensic accountant. Don't be an osteopath, be a preventative osteopath. Don't be a digital designer, be a pixel pirate. So be a little bit creative in that. Humor is really important. And Drew's section yesterday was fantastic on that. If you can get somebody to smile, and if you can get somebody to laugh, even better. That's an extremely attractive proposition. And you'll find if you're chatting to somebody and they're smiling and laughing, other people will join you. They want to be in that party. And being humorous is a really good one. I've got a little story about Alan Wicker, which I'll save for another time. The other thing is to try and identify your super peers. Super peers are people in any group who are disproportionately influential. They might be taking 12 people to a concert. They might be organising the skiing trip. They might be deciding where everybody goes for the 40th anniversary. So there are people out there who are disproportionately influential, and I call them super peers. For example, I did a straw poll, and 24% of the people at a concert I was performing at, only 24% of them made the decision to come. Makes sense. People very rarely dine out alone when we're allowed to. So that means around 50% of the people in the restaurant at any given time probably didn't make the decision to go there. So try and find the super peers. Works really well. A few little tips. Have I got time for 5 little tips?
Go for it.
Go for
Very
it.
fast.
Right. Prepare. If you're not a natural speaker, have 3 topical conversations in your back pocket. Wave if you're online. It's hard to see people. If you've got 49 people and you're talking, wave, because it's much easier for people to spot you. I went to a networking event of over 300 people attending. It was a bit of a melee, but somebody sponsored the hand towels in the bathrooms. Brilliant. So be a bit creative around that. Smile a lot. I always pop to the loo to make notes about people, human notes. Write something human on the back of the card. Approach people if they're on their own. Always do that. And once you've met that person and somebody else hovers around you, be the person who makes the introductions. I could go on, Sihan, but I imagine it would be fun to have a look at some of the comments and do some Q&A.
Yes, well, let's have a look at the Q&A. There's a question from Andrew Williams. Are you an Essex lad?
Yes, I am. I'm very proud to be an Essex lad. Yes, Essex has a magnificent track record. We also have the driest postcode in the country, and not alcoholic rainfall. But I was born in Surrey, to be fair, but I am an Essex lad. Yes.
And also, when you're not naturally creative, how can you overcome this?
I think it's harder for those. Well, to be fair, I would probably argue that. I think if I spent 10 minutes with whoever asked that question, I think they are naturally creative. They just haven't found a way of expressing it yet. But
they need a few minutes in the room with you. Yeah,
there'll be something. What makes them? You know, I found out yesterday that Trisha, one of our other panelists, and I have a sneaking guilty pleasure of country and Western music. So there'll be something that you'll find. Ask questions, because they'll yeehaw from Trisha. There'll be, you know, in those situations, ask people, you know, what are your hobbies? You know, what are your interests? You know, the creativity will follow, I think.
And a question from me, Mark. You talked about, you know, how to show up, how to put other people at ease, and make yourself very approachable, and so on. When it comes to, well, a couple of questions. When it comes to actually the other person says, so what is it that you do? How might someone talk about themselves, what might they say? And I'll think about the second one because I've forgotten that one.
That's all right, no. I think it's isn't it Simon Sinek who talks about the why? Fantastic, go and find it if you are able to on TED. But people want to know why it is you do what you do. So when we set Chuffed up, we were determined to make it different, better, and remarkable. We didn't want it to be another design agency. So we describe ourselves as a social enterprise, and that's the way we operate. We just happen to be able to do great design, branding, and marketing work. But the why is because we want to support emerging talent all over the world, and we have over 100 freelancers in our crew now from all over the world. So it's focusing on the what gets you up in the morning. I'm trying to think of another anecdote that relates to that. Like I think I mentioned on, when you're at a networking event, for example, and you have the opportunity, some people have their name badges, and you have the opportunity when you sign up to add your job title. I once did actually put Turtle Wrangler online, and turned it upside down on another occasion. If you haven't seen it's the remarkability factor that works. There's a guy called Scott Ginsberg, who, and another great TED talk, he once left his conference badge on in the bar, and realized that he was eminently more approachable as a result, because people kept coming up to him and saying, Scott, do you realize you've left your badge on? And so he left it on for 8 years. He even had a tattoo done on his chest that says, hello, my name is Scott, so that it would work on holiday. He's still got this badge on. Okay, so it's doing something that just makes people remember. I remember that. They don't, what you do. The problem is it's a kind of hairpin, because the moment somebody finds out what it is you do, you've got competition. There are other people who do what you do, and that's the nature of it. So the trick is to make sure that they love and adore and think you're fantastic at the point, perhaps even before they realize what you do. And they're showing an interest in finding out how do you look like a really interesting person. How can I benefit from that in some way? So it's focusing on that, operating a bit upstream. Sorry, I'm banging on.
No, I was just looking at that we have a question here. Do you passively wait for others to refer you, or do you proactively ask for referrals to others? And is there a quid pro quo that needs to be balanced?
It's interesting. In the referral marketing group that I belong to, we define referrals as being one in which the person who's being referred to is expecting the call. It works much better. But what I did, it worked a treat yesterday, for example, on Wednesday. One of my sort of referral circle members asked for somebody by name. So I popped onto LinkedIn and realized that actually we were second connections. Pinged him a line saying, a friend of mine mentioned you by name as being somebody they'd really like to connect with. If you'd like to connect with me, I'll make the introductions. That person did accept my invitation an hour later. So I was able to write back to them and say, look, I wonder if I could introduce you guys, because I'm first connections with both of them, and they've got a meeting lined up for next Tuesday. So that's active. Passive is just keeping an ear to the ground, because I know, because they've got 30 fellow members in my referral marketing group, I know they're all out there listening out for people saying, my website's awful, I really need to design our visual identity again, our brand, nobody knows what we do. They're listening out for those kinds of opportunities. And the really important thing in any kind of business development or inbound referral environment is that there is even now there will be people out there talking, saying, oh, I really need a really good design agency. The trouble is, on our own, we only have one pair of ears, and we can only hear a certain number of opportunities. With 30 friends out there listening too, it works a lot better. That's in a referral marketing and networking environment.
And even generally, Mark, I mean, a lot of leaders, tend to focus on the work that they're doing and their teams, and it stays kind of very localized. And something that I talked about yesterday was you don't have influence if you haven't broadened out that reach and talked to other people, your peers and so on, because they can talk about you once they know more about you, and vice versa. You can,
Yeah.
you know, you can advocate for them. So yeah.
Yes, there's a famous saying, the measure of somebody is how well they treat somebody who can do nothing for them. And if you take that approach as a leader in business, and people start to understand that that's your philosophy, that will sort of what's the word? That will filter down and throughout the organisation as being led by an individual who is open. Transparent was a word, I think it was Rob used a lot yesterday. One of the other that came out a lot yesterday.
Was
being
talking
transparent,
about transparency.
open. Yeah, and you know, do it. And the great thing about leaders doing great self-promotion in that way and being open in terms of their relationship development with people is that most of the people that a business leader will engage with will feel as though they're below them in the food chain. So any kind of beneficence, there we go. Any kind of beneficence in those scenarios is really, really impactful.
Brilliant. And we got a couple of comments. There's a lot going on. I can see in people are taking a lot of what you're saying, Mark, and thinking about applying it already, which is brilliant. So there's Sally Hargreaves on. She said, great advice, Mark. Going to connect with the other Sally Hargreaves after this. So you prompted someone to reach out and do that.
Hi, Sal.
Very quickly, what is Crown Commercial Service is a question.
The Crown Commercial Service is an organisation that has been set up to identify organisations who can be rapid response during this current pandemic for any government or local authority projects. So we've been selected as, Charter's been selected for that directory, if you like, mainly because we said we can stand a website up in a day. Brilliant.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And then there's one more question and then we'll wrap up. In these, from Maria, in these changing times, what are your thoughts as to how face-to-face networking groups can be more engaging, enjoyable, and of value for every person attending?
So I assume, Maria, you mean when we're allowed to be face-to-face again, or does she mean face-to-face in this online?
Maria, that will be just drop in either in the chat or Q&A.
I think just on in general point, the online networking has huge benefits.
Yes, face-to-face, she says. Yep.
Sorry?
She says in when we're allowed to resume.
Physical face-to-face. I think we'll be treading gently in those circumstances. We'll have the networking event equivalent of only 20 people in the stalls at a theatre. Quite how you obviously shake hands with somebody when you have to maintain physical distancing, not social distancing, as per yesterday. It's an interesting one. I mean, in the group that I belong to, we think there'll be a healthy mix of online and face-to-face going forward, because there are huge benefits from online doing things like this. I've seen, even when we were face-to-face, to be fair, I saw more of my fellow referral marketing group members and other directors around the area than I did some of my friends and family members. It's the nature of that. But how, sorry, remind me of the question quickly. Sorry, I'm
just pull it up.
Happy to follow up with Maria afterwards, by the way.
Yeah. What are your thoughts as to how face-to-face networking groups can be more engaging, enjoyable, and of value for every person attending?
That's a really good question. The nature of networking groups that work is that they are structured, because some have been going for many, many years and it works. If business development is the output, there's a structure that one goes through, and everybody has an opportunity to engage. But I think what we'll find is that we'll realise that business gets done on the golf course. And my experience is that in terms of the tangible output of a meeting and taking part in something like that, it's what happens before and after the meeting that that's where the business gets done, in my experience. So I think we'll find that the structured part of a meeting is made shorter, but actually people are given the opportunity to wander around. I was a great event where the subject was the subject for topics was put on the middle of the table, so you knew which one to go to, and you were actively encouraged to walk away if it wasn't engaging. So I think there'll be creative ideas around that, bit of sort of collective brainstorming to make it much more engaging. But happy to chat to Maria after.
Yeah, for sure. And look, it's a building relationships. It's a long-term thing. That's something that I always took away from our interactions, and that generosity. Tina made an important point, and then we do have to wrap up, is that she struggled with networking events that descend into conversations about what you can do for me. How do you shift this to connecting genuinely? And I wonder how much of that is we all have an expectation that networking is about finding someone who wants your service, rather than it being a social event that you go to and you give generously of your time and attention. What are your thoughts?
There's a great image. I think it's called the parable of the spoons, the parable of the long spoons. It's worth looking up. It's the premise of that image, just briefly, is that if you're trying to eat with a very long spoon, you can't reach your own mouth, but you can feed somebody else. And in an ideal world, everybody's feeding the person opposite them in the circle. It's a great image, worth having a look at. But I think I've experimented with this. When people say to me, "Why are you here, Mark?" I say, "Actually, I'm here to meet some really interesting people and find some new suppliers." Nobody says that. Very few people do that at networking events. We all think it's a take. But if you go in and give, and if everybody starts giving, experiment with that. Don't try and sell. Spend a whole networking week. Don't even mention what you do, and see how the relationships develop after that.
Brilliant.
And as per our conversation on your podcast, conversations are the what is it? The currency of commerce.
Yes.
Conversations are the currency of commerce, and conversations tend to be about people and what they love, not about what they do.